We are now in aspect 5 of Tavani's chapter 5, which is our lecture 2 on cyber ethics of privacy. And we are now examining the Kantian approach to violations of privacy for the purpose of commerce. So here, we will discuss human beings as ends in themselves in the analysis of data violation, privacy violation in commerce, or data violation, the issue of consent, the issue of manipulation, the issue of choosing for oneself, and the issue of self-realization. All of these are key components of Kantian autonomy. If we are to analyze the morality of surveillance with the help of Kantianism, surveillance or data gathering or data analysis, if we are to analyze the morality of surveillance with the help of Kantianism, we would be concerned with whether persons subject to data gathering and analysis are respected as ends in themselves, right? This is the Kantian language of respect for autonomy. One interpretation of that is to ask whether the consent is free and autonomous to the commercial practices in which data gathering and analysis are used. For this, the consumers must be thoroughly aware of the surveillance and its effects, and have the option of alternatives that provide similar services without surveillance at costs that are not unreasonably higher. What people consent to must also not eliminate the possibility of such a voluntary informed consent and alternatives in the future. Right? So there's quite a bit involved in the thought that people consent to being surveyed, data analysis and data gathering for the purposes of commerce. We must say more about the issue of consent. What is it that we would ultimately not consent to? To being manipulated, to pursue things that are not in our interest, but are in the interest of others. What comes to mind are certain kinds of advertisement and marketing that push our buttons, so to speak, to get us to buy things we would not want to buy upon rational consideration, but that we buy because our anxieties and preferences have been amplified and appealed to in our moment of weakness, so to speak. If every one of our movements is tracked and analyzed, the advertisers and marketers can know at which moment of the day, week, month, etc., which particular anxieties and cravings of ours are most in command of us, and advertise products to us accordingly in an effort to manipulate us into buying them. Commercial entities, after all, are not interested in robbing of us of our privacy simply for the sake of doing so, but they do it in order to sell their products and maximize their profits. Another interpretation of asking whether human beings are treated as ends in themselves is to ask whether human beings are treated as autonomous in the data analysis profiling. Are human beings not treated as predictable automatons who act according to predetermined patterns rather than as individuals who choose for themselves? When we predict that, to use our example, a person will quit their job in 2 years, open their own business, and declare bankruptcy in 10, is there a kind of homogenization going on in these profiling practices that does not recognize and respect the uniqueness and individuality of each person, their ability to choose to do something else and not do those practices that will lead to bankruptcy, right? To profile us and to predict our behavior is to not acknowledge us as free beings. And that is the problem with data analysis from the Kantian standpoint. Another interpretation of asking whether human beings are treated as ends in themselves would be to ask, as we did previously, whether the data gathering and analysis by commercial entities would lead to incredible increase of difficulty of self-realization. being and becoming who one is, with the exercise of one's autonomy in areas such as participation in the intimacy of family or in the choices with regard to sexual, political, and other identities, given the possible and perhaps inevitable bias of employers, businesses, governments, etc. In other words, if the data is known about us on the basis of which our employers or others are likely to discriminate against us, then that data becoming public, counter to our choices, would be a violation of our autonomy.